Cool.
Great. Whenever you're ready, then.
All right. In reality, I am yet to have been left forgotten within a receding spring, so I sit in dim, vacant rooms, listening to the coldness of the rain and the lonely ghost beeps of the answering machine. Your sticky notes bearing urgent reminders die in the recycling bins, carefully torn into neat little rectangles. Someday, unwittingly, I had traveled past my destination, transported around and around the loops of mountains upon the rusty railway where engineers urinate. The murmurs I hear at night, as if on your deathbed, came from the bright shadows engirdling me. Trees outside bloom in light muted hues, battered gently and relentlessly, swaying within the shoveled troughs of the fourth moon. Yet I still recall your exasperated sighs, gasping for air in the rhythmic depths, ceaselessly in repetition, resounding quietly as the tide rises and falls over and over. In a hazy spinning, I hear the full-grown sound in the distance. At distant spring, you see the lighthouse beam in the haze. Having disappeared somewhere, I still smell the familiar scent of spring, of late evenings and early mornings, of the mildly polluted suburban outdoors, of some event I have never experienced in the first place, lingering, enduring, though surely it will all be over soon. Is there a lost articles for everything, as abstract as forgotten dreams, as tangible as misplaced keys? Sheets on a clothesline beneath azure skies phase in and out a bland, black, ill-rendered sight. At nights I dream to unfamiliar faces, coffins unearthed by creep, scratches on my glasses, all reminding me to forget. Falling petals swirl as missing posters twirl. Hey, love, won't you stay a while? As inherent as there are rocks on mountains, remain here as in place and right to be. It is nearly forever, almost instantly, to be swallowed up by nothing. Mayday, I'd like to sleep till Monday, listening to storms brew abroad and abode, and wake to better moral silence by DDT. Run off feed into the turbid, limpid bite. Oh, that's right. I never did like the stuff they put in air, water, soil, and mines.
Interesting.
I wasn't here last time, but you certainly have like a very distinct style, right?
Yeah, I'd say. I don't think we had one last time, or last week at least.
Or do you not?
But,
Okay.
yeah, I'd say you have a very definitive style.
I just want a moment to read over if anyone else
Yeah,
to say.
same. Yeah, same.
I mean, one of the things that is interesting to me is that you go in and out of like comprehensibility. I would say, like I think we discussed this the last time I was present, but there are words that I'm not familiar with here. There's usage of language that I'm not familiar with. So, like the first stanza, right? I'm yet to have been left forgotten is a fairly straightforward, like comprehensible. Like I understand what's going on there. But like on the second page, which one was it? Falling petals swirl as missing posters twirl. Hey love, won't you stay a while? As inherent as there are rocks on mountains. Um, that whole stanza is like very confusing to me. Uh, and I'm not being critical here. I think there's actually something quite nice about dancing in and out of understanding what's going on in the poem. Um, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Well, if I could ask, what do we think it's about? Because now I'm forming an idea. So I'm curious what others think. Like, what's the general, maybe not the meaning, but like, what is going on? Like, what's the setting?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me just like a person thinking and talking to someone that they're close with, kind of opining about the state of the world a little bit. I'm thinking about the line about a birdless morrow or whatever it was, silenced by DDT. Yeah, I don't have a strong sense of what's going on there.
My impression is that after reading it, I think it's definitely a poem that helps by reading it twice, probably. At least for me so far. My impression is that this is post someone's death, someone important, someone you live with, and you're kind of in this weird, maybe purgatory. There's something very purgatory-esque about this, where you're kind of, I imagine a parent or a sibling dies that was being taken care of and was expected to die. And now you're kind of living in this suburbia, this place where you've been living most of your life, but now they're not around. And so basically I'm getting that from the first stanza. Let's see. I've yet to have been left forgotten within a receding spring, so I sit in dim, vacant rooms, listening to the coldness of the rain. Right, a lot of loneliness. The lonely lost beats of answering machine. Your sticky notes bearing urgent reminders die in recycling bins, carefully torn into neat little rectangles. Right, so it's almost like they're clearing something out. Right, if they're alone, who are these sticky notes for, or who do they belong to? Right. So that's my general. It's kind of that, and then it switches into this purgatory where it's like you just live here now, like you're the last one, so to speak. And there's a little, like the other ones, I get a sense of like there's a little bit of comedy, kind of a cynical vibe. Certain lines like "Hey love, won't you stay a while?" maybe is a little bit of dark comedy or humor mixed with like the inescapability of their scenario. Yeah.
I mean, I think another theme that we saw in the last poem of yours that I read, Roderick, is this kind of conflict or tension between. I mean, the last one was like between modernity and the natural world in some ways. Here it's kind of that as well, but it's got a different slant. I feel like last time it was more about technology, and here it's more about like. I mean, there's a couple of mentions of pollution, right? Just like, what's what I'm looking for? Just like our interference with the natural world, but that's kind of a similar. I mean, even one thing I really liked is at the end of the second page. I like repetition in general, and so the first two lines of the last stanza, um, even that, to me, and I'm not sure if this is intentional, speaks of man's world, human's world, the human world cutting through the natural world, right? I hear the foghorn sound in the distance. You see the lighthouse beam in the haze, which are more romantic and pleasant images, of course, than like of the mildly polluted suburban outdoors, but are still speaking to the way in which the human world is invading or interfering with the natural world.
Yeah, I like that. I also get a sense of maybe a little bit of, I don't know, I'm trying to place the narrator in contrast to the person being spoken about or alluded to, right? This person who owned the Post-it notes, who died. I believe there's a line about being on the deathbed.
Yeah, in the second stanza. But it's figurative, as if on your deathbed.
As if on your deathbed, yeah. Right, yeah. I figured that like that happened a little bit ago, right? So the as if is like as if you're still on your deathbed.
Yeah, I wonder. I did not get that the like interlocutor or whatever is dead. I guess the person being spoken to or soliloquized to is dead.
Yeah.
I think it's so ambiguous, right? There's so much.
It's both like it's almost like they're both talking to the dead person and to themselves, and then there's like a weird like is I guess you might do after losing a loved one, where you're kind of contemplating your life as is, and also as if you were talking to them. Um, if that makes sense, because it kind of haunts you to some degree, right? So you're kind of in dialogue with the person. I was going to say there's an interesting line that don't quite, I can't quite ground um, in the person who's died. Um, oh, that's right. You never did like the stuff they put in air, water, soil, and mines. So that colors a very specific type of person that's died, right? Um, Probably a pretty fucking miserable person, to be frank. I mean, they don't like literally anything
Well,
that exists.
I don't know if it's that general, right? Like I took that to mean to refer to the pollution that's referenced a couple of times,
Oh,
right? And if we want to broaden that interpretation to refer to like the human interference, the human uh, element that is interfering with or invading all these natural scenes throughout.
hmm.
I mean, it comes right after this second to last stanza. Maybe I'd like to sleep till Monday, listening to storms brew abroad and abode, and wake to birdless marlow sounds by DDT. Run off eutrophy. So I looked up these words. Eutrophy being high in nutrients and low in oxygen. So
Hmm.
like, I guess like conducive probably to like that like an algal bloom, right?
Oh,
Would
right.
cause eutrophied water, I assume. Into the turbid limpid bite. Uh, so I'm trying to remember limpid. Let's just look it up.
What's bite? Yeah.
Bite is
Oh, interesting.
a curve or recess in a coastline, river, or other geographical feature. And limpid is like pale light or
Oh,
something.
I see. I see.
Free of anything that darkens, completely clear. Okay, right. So that's kind of a weird. And it makes sense, right? There's like a indentation. Like to be very explicit about what this line is saying. There's runoff running into an indentation in the coastline or something like that, a river or a lake maybe, and the water there is clear probably because there's nothing living in it, but it's also turbid maybe from the runoff or just from the waves. And it's the ocean. I mean, who knows? It's impossible to say, obviously.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
and then I guess one question I have is like, does the second to last and last line there run into each other? Silence by DDT or silence by DDT runoff? I mean,
Right. Right.
whatever. It's not. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I think that immediately precedes this. You never did like the stuff they put in air, water, soil, and mines. And the reason that I think it makes sense to generalize from like the pollution aspect to the like broader human element is because of this last and mines thing, right? Like, what are we putting in the air, the water, and soil? It's like fucking DDT.
Right.
Uh, so there's some sort of equivalent thing that we're putting into our minds as well, is the implication to me.
Nice. Yeah, I totally see your reading now. That definitely. Now I see like it's less that this person hates everything. It's literally I didn't know what DDT was, so that's interesting. It is just a colorless, tasteless, crystalline chemical compound.
It's
So
poison. It's poison that we use
poison.
to kill mosquitoes.
Right. Okay.
So we
Interesting.
were. I don't know if you know the history of this, but like, I guess when did we stop doing this? Check. I feel like you would know, but '70s. Yeah. Um, they would just spray entire neighborhoods with it.
Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, it's just poison. Yeah.
There you go.
Did you also read it as talking to someone who's dead? Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess as I'm reading it now, it is all the things I read as signifying a person is, as you've been kind of saying, Sleazy, like definitely merged with naturalistic elements, like gasping for, or yet I still recall your exasperated sighs, gasping for air in the rarefied depths, and so
That's
that's yeah.
I
What?
looked that word up as well. That's like an area. The rarefied zone is an area of the ocean that receives very little light.
Interesting. Yeah. So yeah. As what? Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
What is the fourth moon? There's just like so much in this that like I don't understand. Right? What is the fourth moon in that same stanza? Swaying within the shallow drafts of the fourth moon. I guess here's the one thing I would say if we're gonna do like criticism or whatever. I like this is just personal taste. I like structure, and so one thing that I found very pleasing was the occasional moments of structure in this poem,
Mm.
right? And I think that that's only just that's like more to be like this is a good thing that you did rather than like you should do more of it or less of it or whatever. Um, man, like I said, I really enjoyed at the end of the first page. In a hazy spring, I hear the foghorn sound in the distance. In a distant spring, you see the lighthouse beam in the haze. This little bit of structure gives me this moment of pleasure in a very difficult poem, right?
Right. I like that. Structure is helping out in a difficult poem. That's a good.
What is it about the structure that you found sort of particularly satisfying?
Um, I mean, honestly, it's hard to say. I think it's a taste thing. Like I said, I like people playing with words, and you do quite a lot of that here in other ways, playing with interesting vocabulary, um, playing with, as you said the last time I was present, kind of words from a particular background. It wasn't lost on me that you pronounced drafts rocks or whatever, which I'm assuming is like a Gaelic word or whatever. Uh, I like repetition in particular. I always have because it reminds me of prayer. And I grew up religious and still am kind of religious. Um, and for me, a lot of the function of poetry is similar to that of prayer. So I connect them in my mind quite a lot. But that's a very personal reasoning, and maybe isn't what you're looking for.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just like some. I can never pick up on structure very well, so that's just a personal blind spot for me. But I do like some of these lines, just how they like roll off the tongue, the third to last, run off and trophied into the turbid, limpid bite. A lot of consonants and I think just consonants actually. The like three I's and D's, I think. or
Yeah, I mean,
turbid, limpid, bite, and then trophied, entrophied, eutrophied. I don't know how to pronounce that, but yeah, that sounded really nice. There's another one. There's also some really good this is also a blind spot. Like I have a hard time unless it's smacking me over the head with alliteration or consonants. I tend to like go over it. But there's definitely some good imagery here. Sheets on a clothesline beneath azure skies, like phase in and out of black ill rendered sight. Like that's just good. That's strong. Um, Good imagery. Let's see. No, there's one more.
Roderick Walborn is looking for this. Are there any questions that you had in particular? Anything that you wanted to discuss in particular?
Um, yeah, but I have a few, but I think you probably all have already touched on it. But okay, so jumping on sort of the previous discussion about the sort of the relationship between the speaker and the subject, what sort of tone is the speaker regarding the subject with?
Hmm.
Do you find it to be a little bit somber, a little bit nostalgic, or sentimental?
Yeah,
What sort of vibes, quote unquote, was coming out from that?
I mean, definitely all those things. Somber, nostalgic, playful, even. Uh, to Warren's point, it's a little comedic at times. A little, I mean, a little tongue in cheek, I guess.
Yeah, I unfortunately when I read this, I think I read into it the last poem about the narrator and losing a father. So I thought I as I was reading this, I was kind of subconsciously sticking the dad back in here. You know what I mean? So I read it as kind of the same comedic, dark tone, and you can see that by how I read the very last line because I thought it was about like, oh, that's right, you died and you never liked anything in the world, right? So that was me kind of um, uh, reinterpreting it as the other poem. So now I'm going to have to kind of do another run through without that predisposition. But with so far, with Sleazy, what he said about, and he's pretty convincing, of this having a very heavy like ecological standpoint, right? Whoever's being spoken to is somewhat or completely merged with nature, um, or how nature used to be. It does make me think more nostalgically, less cynical, maybe a little. There's definitely a sense of like purgatory. We're fucked. Pollution is ruining everything, and yet I'm stuck here vibe. Um, yeah, I don't know if that helps too much, but
Yeah. All right. So, are you guys okay with me sort of start to pull back the curtains a little bit and sort of explain what I had originally intended as when writing this film?
yeah.
Oh, right. Also, Warren, speaking of last poem, does the language of this one sort of remind you of the speaker in the last one, or is it not that much of a disconnect? It's more so that you've seen these two in succession that it's sort of.
Yeah, I'll have to reread it. Right now, I'm pretty sure it's because I've read them in succession, and the way in which the scenes are drawn here, because it's kind of what dark, doom-esque, depressive. And I think that's making me forcing a connection to the last poem, maybe more than there is. So I'm going to have to like do a fresh read for me to fully answer that question. But yeah.
Okay. So I'll just sort of explain my ideas going into it. So both of you are very, very right. If you put the two together, yes, the subject is the natural world, and yes, the subject is also a deceased loved one. And those two are sort of merged into the same because the loved one was formerly an ecologist.
Okay.
And so sort of it's when you hear your spouse sort of when your spouse sort of works in that field, it was in environmental science or stuff like that, it's sort of you sort of hear a lot about it essentially. And then there is that I'm really glad that that sense of being stuck sort of after you've been essentially left stranded in the middle of suburbia around, and it doesn't really necessarily feel like the world is collapsing in the traditional perhaps more dramatic way, but I wanted it to sort of feel more subtle, right? Coffins being unearthed by creep and all this talk about pollution and sort of climate change isn't touched upon as in depth, but it's sort of vaguely hinted at generally as part of the association with all the language around it. And it does meant to instill like a sense of overall impending dread. So yeah, that's pretty much my ideas going into it.
So I would,
Now
say,
Yep.
I did not get a sense of impending doom or dread. I would say that if that's like the tone that you're going for, it was much more like nostalgic and wistful and a little playful for me.
I got a sense of kind of a purgatory, depressive
Yeah,
post loved one death. Yeah.
purgatory is a good word for it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It is very entropy-esque. Am I using that word right?
entropy.
Like slowly decaying is kind of the vibe. So
Yeah. The sense of that's sort of what I wanted to go for. Not overtly of an oncoming apocalypse, but more of a slow dread.
Yeah, I think.
Especially reading it now, there are a lot of images that are kind of suburbia on an average day, but then around it is, for lack of a better descriptor, like, depressive sentiments, right? Sheets on a clothesline beneath azure skies. That alone, pretty neutral, right? Phase in and out of black, ill-rendered sight. On nights I dream to unfamiliar faces, coffins unnerved by creep, right? So suddenly that line of sheets on a clothesline beneath azure skies has a different vibe. But just...
Yeah. Speaking of that line in particular, how did you interpret the imagery of that line? Because that line, I wasn't super actually. I thought it was a little bit of a stretch, but was it for you as well?
I imagine sheets on a clothesline beneath a blue sky, like kind of a darkening, almost twilight sky, as the sun sets. That's how I kind of... Very straightforward. I don't think nothing about that was too much of a stretch. Do you mean phase in and out of black, ill-rendered sight?
Yeah.
Okay, so that I definitely didn't have a direct image to attach to. I find in poetry I tend to like have sentences I don't like really understand, and I just kind of like condense them together. I guess I think of phase in and out. Okay, so sheets on a clothesline beneath azure skies, phase in and out of black, ill-rendered sight. The sight part is a little confusing, but I imagine you're walking through a suburb and it's getting pretty dark, and you can't really gauge what you're seeing all the time. and maybe stretching that off into a more emotional state, like ill-rendered black sight as like a depressive sight, skewed in a certain direction. But yeah.
All right. Uh, and okay, just as sort of as the final question I wanted to ask, do you have anything that you feel like I could improve upon? Does it feel a little bit? It's the poem is meant to be meant to feel a little bit meandering, but does it ever stretch for too long and you sort of lose interest, or sort of behind all this sort of thick imagery, does this sort of you feel like a lot of the emotional intensity gets lost?
I mean, it's definitely a difficult poem, and I think that's just important to understand always. Um, it's less difficult than the last poem of yours that I read, and I think the length is quite good. If anything, I would make it more brief. I like short poems. Um, it's always hard to say in this kind of situation what could have been done differently or better, because in a lot of ways, especially with this kind of thing, it is so much what you want it to be. You've explained kind of some of your intention, and I think you do a good job of accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish, which is maybe the most important thing. Um, if there's parts of it that I don't like, it's when I get totally lost in terms of not really having anything to hold on to structurally or in terms of meaning. Um, so, like for me, the second stanza on the second page, which I mentioned earlier, is just a very difficult one. It's kind of all over the place in terms of it's kind of stream of consciousness, I would say, um, and the language is confusing. I think that is there's a balance to be struck in terms of having a poem be more or less difficult at different moments. And it's really up to you whether you want that particularly difficult moment to be kind of there as it is, or give the reader something more to hold on to, either in that moment or around that moment, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's. Oh, sorry, Roderick, go.
Oh, please go ahead, Warren.
I would say it definitely succeeds in being meandering, and I would probably agree with Sleazy that you could make it shorter. I think there are some stanzas that, how should I put it? I think you could do with. I don't want to just say you could do with less stanzas because it succeeds in being um, meandering in a satisfying way. But I would essentially say that, but maybe try to find, if I had to give advice or a suggestion would be find the most critical parts of certain stanzas to condense. Um, See, I want to give some specific stuff. Maybe it is the less. On the one hand, I totally understand what Sleazy's saying with the second stanzas. Second stanzas kind of, the rhetoric, or I mean, the word choice is kind of confusing, pretty abstract. But I really like the first 3 or 4 lines. Someday unwittingly I had traveled past my destination, transported around and around loops of mountains upon the rusty railway where engineers urinate. I think in a lot of way that those 4 lines kind of already gesture towards the sense of meanderingness, right? You already went past your destination, but you're going around and around in loops upon this kind of rusty railway where engineers urinate. And when I think of engineers urinate, I think of them working all day, and they're there so frequently. They know it so well that they just piss where they want, but they know they're coming back. So yeah, I don't know. Now I like that stanza. Although I do see how it's
To clarify, I was
kind
talking
of.
about the stanza on the second page, not that
Oh, okay.
one, which is falling petals swirl as missing posters twirl.
Oh, okay.
Stay a
Yeah,
while.
I took that as like I didn't really have a good idea of it the first read. The second read, I felt like falling petals swirl is missing posters twirl is the image, and then the image says to the person looking at it, "Hey, love, won't you stay a while?" Um, yeah, as if the image of falling petals and posters could say something to you. They would say, "Hey, stick around, dude. Nothing's going on here at the same time," because you get this falling, kind of spinning around, going nowhere thing. As inherent as there are rocks on mountains, that is a bit confusing. But again,
language a little confusing.
Yeah.
That's not how I would use the word inherent.
Sure.
Like as naturally as there are rocks and mountains or something like that.
Right.
Is how I took it to mean, and I've never used the word inherent in that way. I mean, obviously it's understood, but a little odd.
Yeah, I think again there are some lines here that are like remain here as in place and right to be. It is nearly forever, almost instantly, to be swallowed up by nothing. That's a very, again, another 4 lines that really get at the complete vibe of the poem for me. Right, remain right where you are forever, and almost instantly you're nothing. You're swallowed up in this kind of, again, I just think of purgatory. So I don't know what I would have to. I don't know if I'm being very helpful, but maybe I don't know. What do you guys think? It feels like there are multiple places where you very succinctly sum up the theme of the poem of this kind of purgatory deterioration, and maybe you want less of that, right? I don't know.
What do you mean less of that?
Less of that in the sense like if you have 4 different lines in different places of the poem that just nail the theme on the head, is it a little too on the nose, right?
I didn't. I mean, I think part of it is, and I kind of disagree. I get what you're saying, though. I think that you could totally, if you wanted to, make this much more concise. But also, it's totally reasonable to just leave it at the length it is and have it as
Right. Yeah.
meandering. Right, is the word we've been using as it is.
Yeah. I'd also say in general, Roderick, I think your part of your style seems to be long form.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And I also wanted to say, I know the poem you showed us a while ago was from someone in the novel you're working on, but I found the use of imagery to dovetail with also a loved one here was super effective, in a way that I didn't see as much in that poem where I can't remember where someone's going out into the wilderness. I can't remember what that poem was about. Do you know which one I'm talking about, Roderick?
Yep, it was as well. Yeah,
this feels very. What's it? Cohesive? Like the way you've used the natural imagery is very smooth here. Where the other one, it's maybe because of the language, but it was very technical, and in that way would kind of be jarring. So yeah.
Okay. With that line that you were confused about, Sleazy, falling petals as well as missing posters as well, that's meant to be a tying into the direct circumstance of the loved one's death. At the same time, it's sort of meant to be this. I intended it going into it. I intended it to be sort of this appeal to both the breeder and the subject. Subject to sort of stay, to sort of remain, but in the sense, but it's already the subject is already gone, right? And now the speaker is sort of just left here being stuck. And so, with regards to that reoccurring mention of purgatory, could you sort of clarify it for me? Because I'm not super familiar with Christian theology, so I don't really know what exactly is.
Neither am I, but I can give you my pop culture kind of interpretation, understanding of purgatory. It's in between heaven and hell, and I believe generally it's where you go to either wait to be judged whether or not you go to heaven and hell, or go to heaven. I don't know. Sleazy, maybe I don't know if you know.
Yeah, so I'm not Christian, but I have read most of this comes from like Dante's Divine Comedy,
Right.
in which purgatory is a place where either people are, if I remember, residing permanently, having neither made their way into heaven or hell, or temporarily on their way to heaven.
Right.
And so the unbaptized Christians, I believe, are in purgatory and stuff like that. But like heathens before the birth of Christ go to hell, basically. So it's like different levels of like, are you a good person in the eyes of Christ?
So
Whereas like, yeah, both, neither good nor bad.
right, yeah. So reading it, I just looked it up. So I know for the pop culture understanding is essentially a place in between heaven and hell. But here it says, and this is maybe interesting for the emotions of the poem, it's a place or state of suffering inhabited by the souls of sinners who are expiating, I think I pronounced it right, their sins before going to heaven. So they're explicitly being tortured. They're getting their sin tortured out of them so they can go to heaven. Which is interesting. I'm trying to put that in the poem a little bit. It's not exactly how I would read the poem, but yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, is there any sense of guilt felt on sort of on the speaker's part, or is it more of a wistful regret?
There's certain lines stuck out to me. I don't know how to exactly interpret them. Wistful regret is interesting, but all reminding me to forget. That's a line that stuck out to me. I would have to sit on that, right? All reminding me to forget. So in the act of reminding me of, say, a tragedy, it is also asking me to forget. And in some ways, that would be losing a loved one, right? Well, they're gone, they're past, forget about it. I don't know if I'd say guilt. I wouldn't say guilt intuitively.
Okay, that's good. Because going into it, I did not intend that. So,
Yeah.
I'm glad that make it in there. All right. I'm pretty much done. I think I've asked all the questions that I wanted to ask. Oh, and Sleazy, with regards to your earlier question, with regards about the fourth moon, I just meant April, by
Or what?
April.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the fourth moon, so the fourth month.
Oh, okay.
cool. I'm going to suggest that we call it there because I don't think that we have time. We've only got 10 minutes to
Right,
reason
right.
or anything else. I should be able to show up next week as well.
Okay.
If you have anything, and I think I'd like to cover the poem, my old poem as well, if we have
Yeah,
the time.
that'd be cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be
look
awesome.
forward to seeing it.
Yeah, well, thanks for jumping in, guys. I had fun.
All right, I'll see you all later.
Yep. Adios.